Good evening, Justices. My name is Shane Lee, and I will be addressing the second issue of the appeal. This issue centers around the correct contractual interpretation of the operational control clause contained in the sale agreement of Edmonton's locally adored football team. The answer that the court finds to this issue today will have far-reaching consequences with regards to certainty commercial agreements. My submissions today will address three key points to demonstrate that the pre-contractual negotiations between Ms. Walton and Mr. Kuko must be admitted as evidence to accurately interpret the operational control clause. First, I will establish that the parole evidence rule is inapplicable due to the ambiguity of the operational control clause. Secondly, I will show that the pre-contractual negotiations constitute objective evidence of the background facts that show the factual nature. Thirdly, I will establish that excluding the pre-contractual negotiations as evidence would undermine the fundamental goals of contractual interpretation. Before turning to my first submission, I would like to emphasize to the court that the fundamental goals of pre-contractual negotiation is to give effect to the parties' true intentions. My first submission is that the parole evidence rule is inapplicable due to the ambiguity of the operational control clause. The court's reference, this argument begins at paragraph 45 of Don's submitted factum.
Counsel, would you agree with me that relocation was important to both sides of this agreement? Are you, by virtue of the fact that it is not included either in the tax consequence to which your friend spoke about or the operational control clause, aren't you effectively asking the court to correct sloppy drafting?
The appellant's submission is that the parties intended for the operational control clause to grant Ms. Walton control over the team's location. While it is true that it is not stated explicitly in the contract, in 1214934 Alberta and Clean Cut, the Alberta Court of Appeal stated that common sense skepticism about the failure to include essential terms in a contemporary written contract is only increased when there is an actual entire agreement clause in contract. There was no entire agreement clause here.
Can you go back to that? That's on you. Can you?
So the court in that case stated, common sense skepticism about the failure to include essential terms in a contemporary written agreement is only increased when there is an actual entire agreement clause in contract.
But it doesn't eliminate the sloppy drafting that we're having to deal with now, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So effectively, you would agree with me that you're asking the court to, and dare I say, oh yeah, I guess fix what the lawyers or whoever drafted these agreements failed to do back when this deal was negotiated, correct?
Yes, Justice Lindbergh, while I take your point, I don't believe the sloppy drafting is what's issue at hand here. What this issue centers around who has power over or who has control over the team's location, and the appellant's submission is that.
Evidence. Interpretation of a contract is only justified. And you're citing I read paragraph 35 of that. Even when there is no entire agreement clause, there is a strong presumption.
Yes, Justice, because the entire agreement clause is essentially a codification of the parole evidence rule. So even if the parole evidence rule is, even if there's an indication that the contract is all encompassing as an entire agreement clause would do, if there is ambiguity in the words of the contract, parole evidence must still be admitted to resolve that ambiguity.
Okay. I think
Ambiguity was defined in high tech as words that are reasonably susceptible to more than one meaning. There was no clear definition of operational control contained in the sale agreement, which makes this clause susceptible to multiple interpretations. Both the trial judge and the Court of Appeal had different interpretations of the operational control clause, which further supports the fact that this clause is in fact ambiguous. My friends have argued in paragraph 38 of the respondent's factum that the term is defined to mean day-to-day management. In response to this, we submit that day-to-day management is simply one aspect of Ms. Welton's operational control. This clause does not explicitly state that Ms. Welton's operational control is limited to intermediate decision-making responsibilities, as the Court of Appeal found.
If I look at all of the, certainly at the beginning, the gist of his is there must be a number listed. So if we look at all of the evidence, it's definitely suggests that we found that. When you look at the ambiguity in the contract. First, I could interpret this. Okay. They were just in search of them. If she could look. Sorry, could I not interpret that?
Yes, that is one interpretation, Justice. However, if a reasonable person were to look at all of the entire 7-month period of negotiations as a whole, they wouldn't conclude that Ms. Welton and Mr. Kuchel settled on a number that was big enough. Instead, the entire 7-month period, Ms. Welton firmly asserted that she would not enter an agreement until, or she would not enter any agreement that jeopardized the team's location in Edmonton. It was only after Mr. Akufo seemingly conceded this in his last email where he stated, maybe there's a way for you to keep Edmonton was an agreement reached. If a reasonable person were to see all of that, they would conclude that Ms. Welton retaining control over the team's location was a term of contract.
Okay. Question. To hear your point, I go back to my sloppy drafting comment because if it was so important and presumably Ms. Welton was represented well, and there wasn't a power imbalance. But nonetheless, if we do what you're asking us to do, are we not increasing uncertainty in contract negotiation and interpretation by requiring consideration of the surrounding circumstances? Like, aren't we worsening the situation, increasing ambiguity?
The Supreme Court of Canada in SAPA actually held that surrounding circumstances must be considered even in the absence of ambiguity. I assume you're asking me about pre-contractual negotiation for all evidence, whether that would increase uncertainty.
Well, just having to consider the surrounding circumstances is going to, and you may not agree with me, and that's totally okay, is going to increase uncertainty, and a principle in Canadian law is contract certainty. So how do you reconcile those two?
I believe that considering extrinsic evidence such as parole evidence would actually increase certainty, as it would allow the courts to attain a deeper understanding of the parties' true intentions when they came into the contract, when there is uncertainty in a commercial agreement.
Okay, carry on.
If you do that, aren't you saying that evidence is all?
No, Justice, the final submission is that parole evidence should be admitted when there is uncertainty. If there is an entire agreement clause in a contract or the contract is not ambiguous at all on the face of it, there would be no reason for parole evidence. The appellant submits that the court should use parole evidence when necessary.
If we don't look at parole evidence.
The contract does not explicitly state whether Ms. Welton or Mr. Kuchel control over the team's location. The Court of Appeal stated that no extrinsic evidence should be used to interpret the words of the contract. However, they stated that Ms. Walton's operational control was limited to intermediate decision-making such as day-to-day management, hiring practices, and ticket sales and the like. Both hiring practices and ticket sales were not stated explicitly in the contract. That was just the Court of Appeals interpretation.
Why does it say operational decisions?
Mr. Akupo does have operational control over the operational assets as stated in, I believe, 1.3 of the agreement. However, Ms. Walton's operational control over day-to-day management implies control over the team's location, as any relocation without Ms. Walton's consent would significantly impair her ability to even exercise operational control.
Makes sense, thank you.
With all due respect, the Court of Appeal erred in applying the parole evidence rule. I will now proceed to my second submission. The pre-contractual negotiations constitute objective evidence of background facts that show the factual matrix. SAPA endorsed a practical common sense approach to contractual interpretation considered in light of the factual matrix. Even in the absence of ambiguity, the court must consider the factual matrix in interpreting. Pre-contractual negotiations can thus be found admissible when they show the factual matrix. While subjective interpretations of the contract are inadmissible, a court must consider objective evidence of the parties' intentions to prevent the contract from being interpreted in isolation. Court of Appeals interpretation directly contradicts what a reasonable person would infer after reviewing the email exchange. Being mindful of time, I will move to my conclusion. In closing, we submit that Ms. Walton's discretion was exercised in good faith and in line with the purposes for which the tax provisions clause is granted. The appellant also submits that the pre-contractual negotiations must be submitted as evidence to reveal the true intentions of the parties, which was for Ms. Walton to retain control over the team. These reasons, we request that the court overturn the ruling of the Court of Appeal and reinstate the trial judge's findings. If there are no
What is the?
If there are no further questions, those are the appellate submissions. My co-counsel, Ms. Ashton, and I thank the court for their time.